Welcome to today's explainer. We all just kind of move through our daily lives wrapped in this comfortable, invisible blanket of assumed safety. We trust the walls around us, the locks on our doors, and literally the very air we breathe. But what happens when that blanket is violently pulled away? Well, today, we're stepping into the dark. We're going to examine the anatomy of human vulnerability, looking at true, terrifying realities where our baseline expectation of security turns out to be a complete and utter illusion. We're stripping away the comforting lies we tell ourselves to look at what's really hiding in the shadows.
Okay, let's start with a baseline definition here. Vulnerability isn't just a feeling. It's a very real, physical, and psychological state of exposure. And today, we're analyzing two very distinct, incredibly potent triggers for our most primal fears. First, we'll look at the failure of our physical boundaries, meaning what happens when the spaces we firmly believe to be secure are breached without our knowledge. And second, we'll explore the failure of our senses. What happens when the natural tools we rely on to detect danger are suddenly taken away from us?
Part 1. The False Fortress. The Illusion of Indoor Safety. Babysitting, right? It's universally thought of as easy money. You sit on a couch, you watch some TV, and you make sure the kids stay out of trouble. But there is a hidden, terrifying vulnerability in being a caretaker. Think about it. You're trapped in a large, unfamiliar house, completely responsible for helpless children and entirely relying on the parents' assurances that their home is perfectly secure. Take 15-year-old Chris, for example. He's watching 5-year-old Charlie in a nice, quiet, seemingly normal neighborhood. The father points out the locks on the back door before he leaves. There's a deadbolt on top and a regular lock underneath. Chris relies entirely on this father's assurances of a secure perimeter. He locks the bottom lock, completely unaware of a fatal security flaw. That bottom lock? It simply pops open if the knob outside is jiggled. The fortress is already breached.
Now, this isn't some sudden jump scare. It's a slow, agonizing escalation of dread. First, young Charlie comes out of his room, terrified, reporting a scratch in his closet. Chris checks it and finds nothing. But 15 minutes later, Charlie returns. The next escalation, the closet door moved. So Chris goes back and finds the previously closed sliding door is now fully open. Finally, we reach the climax. Charlie calls out with a shaky voice, crying, and silently points to the corner of his bedroom. Pressed into the narrow, dark space between a laundry hamper and the wall is a fully grown man. He's crouched down, trying to make himself small, and just staring right back at the babysitter.
Chris grabs Charlie, runs, locks them in a guest room, and immediately calls 911. The intruder eventually escapes. But just think about the agonizing reality of this situation for a second. What if Charlie hadn't come to get his babysitter? What if that 5-year-old boy had just tried to be brave, lying silently in his bed, while a strange man was hiding just a few feet away from him in the absolute dark? It's a chilling reminder that our physical boundaries can absolutely fail us without us ever making a single mistake.
Part 2. The Threat Within. When the child is the danger.
We're flipping the script completely here. The terrifying reality in this next scenario is that the threat isn't an unknown outsider breaking in. It's the very person being cared for. A 17-year-old high school senior agrees to an overnight job watching an 8-year-old boy named AJ. And the red flags were silent but definitely escalating. First, AJ arrives incredibly unfriendly, glaring at the sitter as if her mere existence is a massive annoyance. Later on, she catches him just watching her, silently from the crack in a half-open doorway. Then, the terrifying climax. She wakes up in the middle of the night with that overwhelming feeling that she isn't alone. She turns on the lamp and finds this 8-year-old boy standing entirely still at the foot of her bed in the dark, just staring at her with his hands hidden behind his back.
When the babysitter forces AJ to show his hands, she makes a visceral, completely shocking discovery. He was holding the handle of a large kitchen knife. She screams, forces him out of the room, locks the door, and calls his mother. And the mother's horrifyingly unshocked response implies she actually knew something like this was possible. The sitter narrowly escaped becoming a tragic, horrific news article that night. The fortress wasn't breached from the outside. It was a cage, and she was locked inside with the predator.
Part 3. The Unseen Predator. The Ringing Silence.
So what happens when the threat isn't actually seen, but sensed in the very atmosphere of the house? Let's look at 21-year-old Dan, who's watching his niece, Emma, and nephew, Lucas. First, 6-year-old Emma comes downstairs and says Dan just came into her room and whispered for her to go to sleep. But Dan hasn't been upstairs. Next, 9-year-old Lucas comes down and asks why Dan just stood by his dresser staring at him. Again, Dan was downstairs the whole time. A serious chill goes through him. Dan keeps the kids with him,
turns off the downstairs television, and just listens. The silence of the house is so heavy, it literally makes his ears ring. And then, he hears light footsteps upstairs.
Suddenly, Emma races down the stairs, crying genuine tears, screaming that someone else is upstairs, someone who just came into her room and said goodnight, and it was definitely not her uncle. Dan grabs a kitchen knife and slowly heads up the stairs to confront the unseen. He peers into the dark bedroom and quietly whispers, "Hello?" just hoping he's wrong, hoping he won't scare the kids if it's actually nothing. He asks the silent house, "Who is up here?" Out of the pitch-black darkness of the 6-year-old's bedroom, this weird, high-pitched voice answers back with this exact phrase, "Aren't they just so special?" Dan suddenly realizes there is a 6'4", mentally unstable man standing right next to the little girl's bed. As Dan grabs the kids and completely flees the house, he looks up to see this massive intruder casually playing peekaboo with his hands from the upstairs balcony. The crazy part? The doors were locked. The intruder was already hiding inside before Dan even arrived for the evening. Part 4. Blinded by the elements. Sensory deprivation.
All right, we're transitioning now from the claustrophobia of the indoors to the expansive terror of the outdoors. Because when an unnaturally thick fog rolls in, it doesn't just change the weather, it actively removes our primary defense mechanism. Sight is how we measure distance, calculate escape routes, and identify threats. Zero visibility plunges us into a terrifying panic where our spatial awareness is just completely gone. It creates a blank canvas where predators, whether they're human or something else, can close the distance, getting dangerously, fatally close before we even know they're there. Across 3 distinct environments, losing our spatial awareness allows terrifying threats to close in. For the driver on a coastal highway, the loss of forward sight sets a trap. For the runner on a trail, the loss of direction turns a familiar path into a total maze. And for the kayakers on open water, the dampening of sound and sight masks a relentless pursuer. Let's break these down.
Imagine driving dead tired on a foggy coastal highway. Our source describes a driver who passes a strange, motionless man just standing on the shoulder in the mist. Minutes later, as impossible as it seems, he passes the exact same man again. When the figure finally steps out to block the road entirely, the driver is forced to stop. But the man in front is just a distraction. The true horror comes when the driver glances in his rearview mirror, only to see someone else creeping up directly behind his vehicle in the fog. The element of zero visibility was used to coordinate a terrifying, blinding ambush. Now, consider the college runner. He's on a familiar 3-mile trail, a route he probably knows like the back of his hand. But when a bizarre, unnaturally thick fog rolls in, the familiar becomes a completely disorienting trap. He totally loses his sense of direction. Suddenly, he's relentlessly chased by an unearthly, siren-like droning sound echoing through the mist. He runs for his absolute life, finally bursting out of the woods, only to look back and see a massive, 7-foot-tall dark mass standing completely silent, just watching him from the obscure tree line. The fog didn't just hide the predator, it isolated the prey. And out on the open water, the terror is drawn out over hours. 2 kayakers are navigating through thick fog when they begin to hear it, the rhythmic, steady sound of unseen oars following them. They can't see who is rowing, they don't know why they're being hunted, and they literally can't outpace the sound. It is hours of agonizing psychological torture. When the fog finally lifts and they hit the safety of the beach, they discover a rowboat. Next to it are fresh, wet, barefoot tracks leading straight from the water directly to their exact landing spot. They were never alone in the mist.
Part 5. Omnipresent Vulnerability, the Ultimate Takeaway.
So we really have to face the unsettling, unifying reality connecting all of these sources. Think about it. In the false fortress, we trust our deadbolts in our quiet neighborhoods, totally unaware a threat might already be inside. With sensory deprivation, we trust our own navigation and sight, completely forgetting that a simple shift in the weather can leave us blind to an ambush. In both cases, our baseline expectation of safety is literally nothing more than a comforting illusion. Which brings us to the end of our explainer. The shadows are always there, right? Whether they're crouching behind a hamper in a suburban bedroom or standing silently just past the tree line in the thick fog. So I'll leave you with this final thought to carry with you today. Knowing exactly how easily our safe spaces and our own natural senses can fail us, how secure are you right now?